Welcome to Enchanted Astrology with Ariel Smith. Thank you so much for joining me today as we look at the astrological forecast for the week of March 25th until the 31st. So we are still moving through these Pisces and Aries energies as we are closing out, wrapping up, and saying goodbye to some old ways of being and starting fresh with a brand new energy, a brand new lease on life, and setting a clear path forward. Now, to start the week on March 25th, we have the Sun now at 4 degrees of Aries, forming an exact conjunction to Saturn, also at 4 degrees of Aries. Now, last week, the Sun would have formed an exact conjunction with Neptune, where it received insight into a higher path forward. And this was at 1 degree of Aries, and this was where you got to see yourself as part of something much larger than just individual you. So this would have evolved your sense of self out of that little separate me concept into how the boundaries of where you start and stop are not so clear and certainly not so small. Now we know our souls are ethereal, so we are energy beings first, and we are not separate from the many organisms and life forms that we rely on to exist, like the bacteria in your gut, for example. So they are just as much a part of you with their own form of superintelligence that actually can instruct your brain in many ways. We have a bit of a prideful way of thinking about ourselves, that we are this ego persona with a brain and a mind that is like our own. And in fact, our mind is not just a 3-pound lump of water, fat, and proteins that sits at the top of our head. Our mind extends far beyond that and involves the contribution of many different species that live in us, on us, and around us. And as a collective species, our minds as humans are not separate from each other either. I will be discussing this more and more as the lunar nodes shift into that Leo Aquarius axis later this summer, as I see that being a big theme of pulling us out of our sense of pride and into a place of deeper humility. But we get a sense here with the Sun conjunct Neptune at 1 degree where we are seeing a blurring of the boundaries between our sense of individual selves with others. That maybe we're not so individual after all. And this is supported by the ruler of Aries being in Pisces, along with Mercury conjunct the North Node, where we are getting information that heightens our sense of connectedness and compassion for others, and it softens those rigid boundaries that we draw that define us. So we are seeing our old identities dissolve and new intuitive understandings start to emerge. And because this is on that world point at 0 degrees of Aries, this is much bigger than just any one person. So it's not just looking at you individually, but humanity as a whole. So it's refreshing our collective identity of what it means to be a human being and how our understanding of who we are is deeply changing and evolving at this time. Now, this week on March 25th, that sun moves on to form an exact conjunction to Saturn at 4 degrees of Aries. Now, the rhythm of Aries is fast. It wants to move on its own time and quickly, and we associate the sun's rhythm with the day. So it's a daily cycle of the sun rising and setting that we equate our identity to. So we get up in the morning, we perform tasks, and then we rest and rinse and repeat. And the rhythm of Saturn is very slow. So Saturn rules the long geological processes that take place over hundreds, thousands, and even millions of years. So as we start to incorporate a larger framework into our sense of self to include other forms of life that we are irrevocably connected to, we now encounter these longer rhythms that don't bend to our first person sense of self, as they have their own intelligence and self-organization. We can think of things like the gut microbiome, often called the second brain, that can influence your mood, cravings, and even your decision making. Right? The heart has its own neurons and has even been found to have its own form of reasoning. The immune system, the nervous system, we are a network of these systems that have their own intelligence built in. And we don't command them with our logic and reason. We are part of a connective system that is so beyond us and our personal ego identities. And this is the humility that we will be developing more and more as the nodal axis shifts into that Leo Aquarius. And Saturn is the traditional ruler of Aquarius. And this conjunction with the sun here is bringing a much more grounded and structured way of understanding who we are as our identities shift from first person only into a more collective and cooperative mindset. Saturn is also giving us a sense of our own responsibility and accountability within this framework, where our responsibility for ourselves deeply helps and supports the health of the network, right? Because sometimes, it can be easy to let yourself down, but much harder to let someone else down. So there's a sense here of wanting to take responsibility and accountability not only for your own sake, but because that's how you can help support others as well. And this is associated with that Mars and Mercury in Pisces, where your actions and perspectives are guided by a sense of compassion and unity. So this can be a desire to really want to take the right actions. It can be a sense of seriousness where you don't want to make excuses and you don't want to be reckless with your energy or act in unconscious, unaware ways. You want to be wise with it. So the stakes seem much higher than just you. So there's a sense of seriousness and responsibility here of the impact that you truly have. Now, the next day, on March 26th, the sun moves on to 5 degrees of Aries, where he will form an exact sextile to Pluto at 5 degrees of Aquarius. And incidentally, this occurs at the same time that the moon forms an exact conjunction to Jupiter in the moon's home sign of Cancer at 15 degrees. Now, we know the moon moves through the zodiac wheel the fastest, spending roughly 2 days in each sign. So her aspects aren't always front and center stage, as she just doesn't carry as much weight, let's say, as the outer planets. However, when these synchronicities show up, she's there for a specific reason. So she's in the right place at the right time, and this is a synchronicity here. So the moon and Jupiter are also in a trine with Mars, Mercury, and the North Node in Pisces. So there is a lot of water energy here, and as well as that Aries and Aquarius sextile. So there's a lot going on. So let's try to unpack this. Now, we have Pluto in an ongoing sextile with Saturn to kind of set the broader stage. Now, Pluto is working to bring the power down to the level of the individual in order to decentralize it. And Saturn in Aries is requiring individuals to act responsibly with their own power. So Aquarius wants sustainable change, and it wants to evolve collectively. Now, capitalism, for example, is a system that does not evolve collectively because it relies on austerity. There is a really good interview with Clara Mattei, who is an economist that has researched this extensively. So I will link that interview in the show notes for you to take a look at. But she speaks to how capitalism is a structure where one group's advancement actually relies on another group's decline. So that is built into the structure of capitalism. And we see this. This was the basis of the Atlantic Exchange back in the 15 to 1700s, where the modernized world was built on the mass exploitation of people in the Caribbean and Africa through enslavement, forced labor, plantations, and resource extraction. So this meant the westernized worlds could advance, but that advancement was at the cost of millions of lives and the decline of the areas that they exploited. Now, this is not Aquarius advancement. Aquarius wants equality and a collective evolution. So Pluto is doing this deeply transformative work here to correct that, to balance that. And Saturn in Aries in a sextile is helping to build structures and authority that exist closer to the individual level. So it's more personalized, it's less vague. And this does require that each individual take responsibility for themselves. So these planets, Pluto and Saturn, are deeply working together in the sextile. Now, the sun coming into this supportive aspect grants opportunities to use your personal power effectively, right? So to step more into a healthy expression of your personal power and work with that Pluto energy to make meaningful changes. Pluto creates, annihilates, and transforms. So if there is something that has been stale, stuck, or frustrating, basically something that just needs to move or move on, there is support here to deeply change and transform something for the better and in an empowering way. So Aries grants the courage to change, and Pluto in Aquarius grants the power to make a lasting impact. And with this, we have that Jupiter conjunct the moon in Cancer. And this is extremely supportive and nourishing because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer and the moon is at home in Cancer. And so she will be making this conjunction about once a month, which really opens and expands the heart to allow us to feel more intuitive, caring, and generous with each other. But it also expands our sense of belonging, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, where our sense of who we are connected to is deeply expanding. And the moon conjunct Jupiter is also forming a trine with that trio of Mars, Mercury, and the North Node in Pisces. And this is plugging in our expanded sense of belonging to a self-guided, higher emotional intelligence that is on its own path of evolution. It's where our individual or even human path of evolving our consciousness is one expression or part of a universal self-guided evolution that exists within all beings at all levels of consciousness. Mercury and Mars in Pisces are guided by a self-organizing system. It's a distributed form of intelligence that is dynamic, it is cooperative, and it acts in unison and connection with all life. And that action is not imposed on it externally. Rather, it is innate within it. So just like how a seed doesn't grow because we teach the seed how to be a tree and we motivate it, no, it grows into a tree because that is innate within the seed from the beginning. So there is a lot of natural flow syncing up here with a higher intelligence behind the wheel. And the more we listen to the intelligence of these connective systems, like our heart, our gut, our intuition, the more we are accessing that higher form of intelligence and synchronizing our rhythm up with it. Now, on this same day, we also have Venus forming an exact conjunction to Chiron at Aries at 25 degrees. And Chiron in Aries is like the original wound where we saw ourselves as separate beings that existed only individually because we forgot our connectedness. And that brings up these fears like rejection and feelings that come from not being included or not belonging to something greater. And Venus conjunct Chiron here is bringing a sense of softness and healing around that wound. I'm seeing her as bringing a sense of comfort to Chiron, reminding him that he has never, ever once been separate. That he is loved in ways beyond what he can ever know with reason, because he is loved beyond reason. So there is a softening of defensiveness, a relaxing of the need to earn your self-worth, because you don't. And knowing that you are infinitely worthy because of who you authentically are. And honoring your authentic self-expression from a place of humility and trust in the larger design. So these are the energies playing out this week. I hope that resonates and is helpful as you navigate your own journey. I do have a Yin Yoga Aries practice specifically on getting in touch with your authentic sense of self. If you feel called to check that out, please do. And that is available through my website at enchantedistrology.ca. As always, thank you so much for being here and listening in. I will be back next week with another episode.